honest with you, if you don't have an understanding of how it works, what it's capable of, and so on, you're going to really have some issues in your classes in the near future. This isn't the first time this has happened. I remember, almost 25 years ago when the internet came out, I wrote a book and traveled the country teaching people what the internet was. And, it took me 2 years, even in my own institution, to get internet in our classroom. And now it's everywhere. It's pervasive, everything that we do, right? And I will tell you, AI is going to take the same route, except a little faster, and it's going to have more impact. Okay. So, what I want to do today is just show you some examples of why you really need to start playing with this and use it to enhance the teaching and learning process. Okay. Um, so why do we want to use AI? Well, there are multiple advantages of using AI, right? So one is that we can personalize learning. We'll show you some examples of that. But AI can enable us to have completely updated content every time we teach it, especially when we're talking about like assessments and things like that. But we can also build tools that adapt to the user, and we'll show you some examples of that this morning, right? But we can actually easily develop these things, and these aren't projects that take you months to develop. We can actually pick one out this morning. If you want, I can show you how we created it. And the one thing I will tell you is just a short little advertisement. I'm on sabbatical this semester, and my goal in sabbatical was to write a book for community college faculty on how to leverage AI to improve teaching and learning, to improve and engage student learning, and also deal with the negative aspects of AI and how we deal with those things. Okay, so if you're interested in that book, it's going to be free. We're going to distribute it with OER. We have a publisher at this point, and it should be out by this spring, and we'll promote it through the NCyTE Center. So, but that should be available sometime this spring. That will basically give you a workbook that goes through all the different kind of things I'm going to demonstrate to you. All right. Another reason we want to use it is assessment and innovation. It can help us automate assessment. I'm going to show you some examples of that. But we can generate new assessments, not only for each time we use an exam, but for each user, if we wanted to do that with the back end of AI. And then finally, we can make content more engaging and interactive, and we're going to show you lots of examples of that today. Okay, so those are some of the reasons why it matters in education. I think we've already talked about this. This is not something that's going to go away. AI is actually a force multiplier, and I'll show you some examples right off the bat on how it can be a force multiplier. So what do we mean by that force multiplier? Well, if I want to create an activity, what I can do, and I think most of you have played with AI and played with prompts, but I don't know how many of you have used personas. But what personas basically do is they let you build a team around you. Okay, so as an example, if I want to create an exercise, the very first thing I might do is have AI go in and research that content, right? So I have a researcher now on my team, right? And I can tell it specifically what types of things to research. I can tell it which documents, which websites, which papers. I can narrow the scope, and it will do research and basically become familiar with all of those things I told it to do, right? Then I can take it to the next level. In the same prompt, I can say, now take all that information that you just researched, and now I want you to analyze it and analyze it from the perspective of an expert instructional designer, right? And I can say, I'm teaching a class in this particular topic, and I want you to identify what are the knowledge and skills that students should get out of this lesson, and then help me build a comprehensive lesson to teach this particular topic. So we've now multiplied our force. It's now us. So individuals who are using AI. We now have a researcher that went out there and became familiar with the content that should be taught. And now we have someone else on our team that's going to tell us what are the best ways to teach that content? What are the best ways to assess learning in that content, right? That's what we mean by AI can be a force multiplier, right? And we'll take it to the next level. The next level is I want to take that content and I want it to be available to everyone on the web. Well, what I can do then is build that lesson as a web page. So I can say, act now as an expert web page developer. Take the content from the instructional designer and now make it into an interactive, highly or visually attractive type of module, and let me publish it as a web page. And one of the things that we do when we teach this class is we teach everyone to create a GitHub account, and we show you how you can use that as a library, and then you can basically take that content and use it in every single class, right? So that's why it matters. It enables you as a teacher. And by the way, I want to get rid of this thing that, AI is going to take our place. Let me tell you that the real impact and the most useful or practical use of AI is when you have an expert leveraging this technology, because it still takes your imagination and what you want to accomplish with it and what task you need to tell it to perform, right? So without my guidance, it's not going to produce the type of content that I want, right? So I don't think it's going to replace the instructor at all. In fact, I think it's going to be the opposite. I think if you don't know how to use AI in the near future, you are going to basically be sort of pushed out because it's going to be a foundational skill in teaching and learning. So I really feel that it's not a technology that's necessarily going to replace us. It's going to enhance us and create this big force multiplier that really enables us to produce quality products. And what I really like about it, I mean, I've authored multiple textbooks. And the problem I always have is it's really never what I really want when I produce the textbooks, because the publishers will never give you the budget that you need to create the type of graphics and types of things that you want in there. They'll always be like, you can pick two of them, but you're not going to get all eight of them in this chapter or whatever, right? Because they don't have the budget. And I understand it's a business that they have to run, right? Well, you can shatter all of that with the use of AI, right? Because now you are in control of building the graphics and so on. And even this PowerPoint I did, it basically created each and every one of these graphics and laid it out. After I told it what I want on each page and so on, it did. So I don't need a graphic designer. I mean, we still use a graphic designer because they can use this tool and bring it to even a higher level. But this is the type of content it can build for you just by you providing what you want, right? So let's show you a couple examples. So I'm going to bring this one over now. So this is one of our repositories. So we've been going around the country teaching a workshop, a 2-day workshop. And what we basically do is tell every teacher, bring in your lesson and let us help you build content for that lesson. And that content can consist of all kinds of different things. So let's just show you a couple interactives that it can consist of, and then we'll show you some other types of things that it can produce as well, right? So all these are cybersecurity instructors. So I think all of you, have some idea of, the AI threats, right? So in cybersecurity threats, so I can basically just do this. I can have a go in and basically just do a really nice job of just organizing and putting this together as a student handout, or this could just be a page in my Canvas course, right? But look at the nice layout it does. In each one of these, one of the things that AI is really good at, by the way, is connecting it to your students, right? What are the two things as teachers we use to take that content and connect it with our students? Anyone know the two things we typically use? All right, we'll typically use examples. So you can see we have examples here, and we can use analogies, right? Because that takes content and it connects it to their life, to the things that they do and that they can relate it to, right? And it's one of the beauties of AI is I can easily say, okay, lay out the 10, greatest threats of AI, and now let's give me an example I can give with my class for each one of these. And I could even say produce an analogy for each one of these, and it will do the same thing, right? But this is just a very simple example of how you could use AI. Then we might want to go to a little more complex, way of producing or implementing information, right? So as an example, I might want to, let's say teach a class in RSA, right? So I'm going to teach how keys are created with RSA. Well, if any of you that teach RSA, you know that it's an algorithm that we use, that we have to have two large prime numbers, right? We have to use a modulus and so on, right? And usually most of your textbooks are going to use Alice and Bob. So I can basically say, go to my textbook in this chapter, and I want to create an interactive that demonstrates how RSA works. And I want a step-by-step breakdown for my students so they can understand how the algorithm actually works, right? How the Euler algorithm actually works. So here we go. Alice goes in. She's going to pick the size of her key and she'll say, okay, let's generate my public key. Goes in and generates the public key. Then Bob is going to take information, prime numbers, and information from Alice and create the public key. So now we have two keys that are different. And here is the data that was used to create those keys, right? And we can come down here, and this steps us through the algorithm step by step by step, learning how Euler's totient is used to generate these pairs of keys, right? And then we can even like demonstrate it. So, we can put in a message here and have it encrypted with the public key, and then have it decrypted with the private key, right? And it gives us all the content that we basically need. Here's what I really want to show you, though, I think the most important part of this. What's the problem with teaching this? Well, your students have to know what prime numbers are. They have to know what modulus math is. They need to know what a factor is, right? They've had that in the past, right? Where do we learn prime numbers? Well, we learn it in fifth grade. Do they remember how prime numbers work? Probably not. At least my students don't, right? So they need a little review. And the problem we have is most faculty members see AI as only a tool that they use as a crutch. And the argument is they're not going to learn foundational skills. Well, they're not going to learn foundational skills unless you know how to use this tool to build things to help them build those foundational skills, right? And you can make them extremely interactive and engaging and so on. So now they can leave and they'll truly know how to do some of these things. So let's go back and let's say, all right, I want all my students so they understand this. I'm going to give them a little, review of prime numbers. So I'm going to go down and we had some teachers in the class create mathematical ones to show prime numbers, right? So first thing I'll just do is let's just go through what a prime number is. So we'll go in here and we'll have it start to count prime numbers, right? So we start to see what prime numbers. I can describe what a prime number is, and now they can see examples of it, right? And they can play with this as long as they want. They can stop it, pause it, whatever. But this is a tool they can go home with, or I can use it in class, or we can break them up in groups and have them play with this. This took me maybe a minute to produce with AI, and I'll show you how to do it, okay? Then we might go back and we might want to test them, right? So now we're going to go ahead and test them on prime numbers. So we could create another one. It just starts to create random numbers and says, okay, is this a prime number or is it not a prime number, right? They say it's a prime, it will tell them if they're correct or not. If they said it wasn't a prime, it will turn red and they can see that it was not a prime number. So they can now actually test themselves. And we can go through and do these one at a time and give examples where they can actually test this, right? And then I might want to go back and show them how modulus math works, right? So I created this one, maybe a minute, right? This one took maybe 2 minutes, right? But we go in and I said, okay, I want to create a modulus activity to teach my students modulus math. And if you all remember how modulus math, you learned this back in fifth grade or fourth grade, right? You'll remember it's something like a clock, right? We can change the modulus, which is like the hands on a clock, right? It's a system of how many counts we have. So in this case, I can move this here and they can use this to set the modulus. So we'll set the modulus for 15, okay? And then we're going to have a count. So we'll say we have a count of 27. All right. And now what we can literally do is have it play and show how modulus math works and what the remainder would be if we have a modulus of 15 and a count of 27. Right. And again, AI can produce this in a matter of a couple minutes. Right. And have this really nice visual, engaging kind of thing. So what might I do now? I might break up my students and say, okay, let's work in pairs. And I might have a list of 5 problems that they have to go through. And by the time they're done, they're going to remember how modulus math works. Right. And I'm not done yet. They're going to need to know a little bit about factoring. So I might also have a little thing in here with factors, right? So I might put a number in, let's say 130, and I'll say, okay, show me all the factors, and then also show me the primes, right? And they can now use this tool to go through it and relearn what factoring, refresh themselves what factors are all about, right? So now when I go back to RSA, they're going to understand all those steps that were necessary that you walk through when you create a pair of keys. And then we'll just show them, if you need RSA keys, we can also show students how to use AI to generate a key generator. Very simple, right? So again, I had to create this key generator in maybe 2 minutes, right? All I had to basically do is say what size keys I'd like it to support, right? What key formats I want it to support. And now I can basically just go in and say, okay, generate a pair of keys for me. And here we go. I have a public and private keys, and these are legitimate RSA public and private keys that could actually be used, right? So you don't have to go and search for something. You can actually build this and put it right into your curriculum, right? And that's the other thing we want to show is that this can now go right in the page of your Canvas or Blackboard or whatever, right? Because all it is a web page, and I can put it up on GitHub, and we've got a whole library of these things now. You can see we've got, I mean, every week we teach this, we add to it because teachers are building more and more stuff with it. Everything from games to, and by the way, we do this across multiple disciplines. So it's not just limited to cyber, but there are all kinds of examples of using these. The one I really thought you might be interested in is, I've taught a threat analysis and protocol um, analysis class, right? And I used to use, if you've taken our class, I always used network sorcery, right? I love that page. A guy created it back, 15 years ago. It was a engineer out of Silicon Valley. And he basically took all the protocols and put a page for each protocol that it would break down and tell you what the protocol was, how it worked. It showed you what the header was. So now when you started to work with those protocols, you had a reference where you could look things up, right? AI has let me bring that to the next level now, right? So not only can I go in and look at DNS, so AI created all of this. All I told it is I want to have an overview. I want it to demonstrate how DNS works. I want a review of the record types. I'd like to go through what the header is, and then let's let students actually build a DNS header. So they can see how an attack would work. And someone could just basically use a tool like this to create their own header to potentially attack a system or send a wrong DNS lookup, so on. And then I can have a little quiz with this, right? So if you just go through this, it goes through and now walks through step by step what happens with DNS and what the steps are, right? And then it goes through and gives you a breakdown of each of the different records. So we have different record types, right? And it will literally go through and let us break down each type of record. And I can have it even explain what they are. I didn't do that in this one. And then look at this. It goes through and gives you the entire header. So this is what was in the old network sorcery. So if you take our hacking, our pen testing class or one of our other classes, we go through and teach you how the headers are constructed and so on. And then look at this. It brings it to the next level now. Now students can go in and set the headers. They can literally go in and put in the domain name. Right? They can put in the record type, they can put in the time to live, they can put in the IP version 6 address, and then they can create the record. Okay. Um, so, and we can actually simulate here looking up a record. So we can put ones in and show what the process is for simulating. But we did that for each and every one of these. And even things like, IP, ICMP, look at same kind of thing. So you can introduce what it is, how it works, the different message types, and then literally go through and show them how the headers are constructed, and then let them build a header. So now when we start to do protocol analysis, they've actually worked with this one. They have a tool now that they can produce basically any one of these protocols. Look at this. We have a whole library here. So everything from DHCP to DNS to IP to HTTP, IP version 6, LDAP, NAT, NTP, and so on, right? But I can do it basically with any one of these protocols, and I can now just put them in my course. And the way I do this one is I assign these to specific students, and then they have to identify attacks that use these, right? Or malware or whatever. And then they have to go through and show how this protocol works, how it's constructed, and how you might create the packet that could be used in an attack, right? But that's the type of interactive content that you can actually build as you get more comfortable and better skilled at using AI. And then let me show you some additional ones you can do. Just simple things like, hash calculators, right? I always had to go and search for the hash calculator I wanted on the web. Well, let's just build our own. So I can go in and build the hash calculator the way I want it, right? So I can go in and put my text. I can use HMAC key if I want. I can tell it which of the algorithms I want to use, and I can add a key if I want for each one of these. And this is a fully functional hashing calculator that will support CRC32, MD5, SHA-1, 256, and 512. If I wanted more, I could basically go back and have it generate more, right? But this is a fully functional one, so I could put in this. I could put a key in here, right? And then I can go ahead and I can just create the hash by itself, right? And you'll see as I do this that the hash sizes are different based on the algorithm, right? And each one of these are different. And if I wanted to make it a secure hash, I could go in and give it a key, right? In HMAC, right? But basically, I could now use this to demonstrate whatever application I'm teaching hashing with, whether that's virus detection or whether it's validating evidence that that law enforcement has used to capture information. They're hashing it so that proves no one's messed with it, or whatever the application happens to be. That's what how I could use this one. Oh, hold on one second. All right, Lawrence, you got it. Come on. Come on. Yeah. My grandson decided to join our class, the 1-year-old. All right. But that's how you could, or let's say you want to show Diffie-Q. A Diffie-Hellman. This one will let you literally go through and use the paint analogy where you can select your colors of paint and you see how that works. It's one way, it's not reversible. So if you use the color analogy to teach a Diffie-Hellman, this one will let you do it. So you can go in and literally pick your colors. And you can see that the Diffie-Hellman key changes and that it's not a reversible because they're not going to be able to pick they're not going to be able to identify backwards which colors were used to create this because it's an unlimited number, right? But we can use this whole thing and show it mathematically as well, right? We can do it with a calculator. So if we want to go in and show it, with a calculator, some real world uses of it and a little bit about the security of Diffie-Hellman, right? But these are all available to you now. But what we'd really like to do is have you be able to build these yourself. And then we can get to really crazy stuff, right? Like how many is have your students study for certification exams? Probably all of it is, right? Well, wouldn't it be nice if your students had a tool that they could go to? So let's say our students, in our program, they need to study for these 8 certifications, right? So I want to create a tool for them where they can basically generate tests, right? Practice tests to get ready for a certification, right? So first thing I got to do, I'm using an API on here, so I got to make sure the API is configured. It looks like it is, okay? So now I can go out and I can have them generate a test. So they can pick the certification. What certification you want to take? Let's say they're going to take Security Plus, right? What domain do they want to study? Well, we'll say the security domain. And then how many questions do you want to produce to practice? Well, we'll say 10. And now we'll have it go in and actually generate, and it's using AI right now. You notice it's taking 10 to 30 seconds to go in and actually generate a brand new test every time they go and take this. So every time they take it, it's going to create more questions for them that they can use in preparing for the certification. And it bases it on the objectives from each one of the domains. Now, when you get into this one, you need APIs, so it's a little more complicated. And we show you how to do this in our AI course, right? But look, I have a beautiful test now that will give feedback and so on, that students can go in and take in preparing for the Security Plus. Okay, so just to show you a couple other things, we don't just limit it to interactives. In our class, we talk about the relevance and how AI, why we need to know it, what are some of the technologies involved and so on. And in the class, look what we're able to do. So like, let's say we want to talk about the rationale of teaching AI. Well, I can take that whole lesson and I can automate it. I can make it fully engaging, right? I can have graphics generated in it, whatever the topic happens to be that we're covering in that section, I can use AI to basically build that content. Okay. So we start off by just talking about, just the basics of AI, including like, let's say you want to teach AI in all of your classes. Well, you might want to use this one. This one just introduces what are the core need to know concepts and terms that you'd want to teach your students about. So if you went to the foundational ones, here are the found, so they should know what machine learning is, a neural network, and so on. They can click on each one of them and get more information. In some cases, there's activities that go with these, but just like a real primer on what is AI and what are the different technologies that are incorporated, right? Then we go into the tools that we use. And I always like when we show like some of these um, high-end tools, I mean, some of the high-end content that we built, they always ask me like, what did you use? And I'll usually say it really doesn't matter. I mean, I could use Claude, I could use ChatGPT, I could use Copilot, I could use Gemini, Grok, Perplexity. I mean, in most cases, it doesn't matter. It's how you use those tools, right? But what we did here is basically showed you the big seven and how they work, how you configure them, and just, like, say, here's the interface to Claude as an example. And you can just click around and see what each of the things do, and it will tell you what they do and so on. You can go through and navigate it. And then we have like a little tutorial on Claude. So let me close this chapter one so I don't have to keep scrolling through that. But let's say you wanted to know more about ChatGPT or Claude. So we'll go into what is it, what are the benefits, and look at this is all interactive content. What are the benefits? How do you get started? So how do you go in? What do you have to do to create an account? What does it cost? Right? And all this is updated regularly, right? What are activities that you could use it for? What are some of the best practices? What are the privacy considerations? What are some of the advanced features of it? And so on. And we do that for each one of those tools. So if you look at here, we go through almost all of the major LLMs and then a couple of the Swiss knife ones that we use. All right. But that's the second, part of what we would want to cover. And then how do you build a prompt? So let's go ahead and build a tool now. Let's show you how to build something. So when we talk about a prompt, the prompt is the directions you give it to actually build something. So anyone have something they'd like to build? Any have a lesson in cybersecurity, some kind of tool, interactive that you'd like to build? I should open up chat here. Is the chat
Try one
open?
on fundamentals of Python. They have to know before they create
Okay, so the
anything.
fundamentals of Python. Okay,
Mhm.
so let's show you how you'd go about building this. What tool do you want to use? Well, I've been building some content this morning, so I don't want to push the limits on some of mine. So I'm going to use Gemini, but I could use Claude if you want me to use Claude. Um, but I'm just going to go in here. Can you still see my screen?
Yes,
All right, so I'm going to go in. I'm going to use Gemini for this one. Okay, so you wanted the fundamentals of what was it again?
of Python
Of
programming.
Python. Okay,
Yes. Mhm.
so first, what am I going to do first? The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say, act as a college professor that teaches Python. All right, so I'm giving it a role, and then I'm going to tell it to do something, right? So now I'm going to say, all right, well, let's go in and research it. So research the fundamentals of the Python programming language. Why? Why am I doing this? Because I wanted to have a base of knowledge that is going to get everything from the spelling of things to the proper terminology to the core things that you would want to teach in Python, right? So by having to do this research, it's done some reading now and it's going to know, the topic. But now I want to do the force magnifier, right? So now I'm going to give it a new persona. So now I'm going to say, take this information, okay, and now act as a instructional designer or expert instructional designer, and design a lesson on the fundamentals of Python. Okay, so now I've got two members of my team, right? I have someone that's going to doing the research, gathering the information, and now I have someone that's going to look at that information and determine what's the best way to teach this. And I might even say specifically analyze what? The knowledge, skills, and abilities or competencies, right? Okay, so now it's going to specifically identify those things, right? And by the way, I could go to another level. So at the lowest level, you say research. At the next level, you say analyze, because there's difference, right, between researching something and analyzing it. Research means you're reading it, basically, right? Analyze means you're going in and trying to understand it, create understanding of it, right? And then I might want to go to the next level. What would that be? Does this remind you of any model out there that we use in teaching, like Bloom's taxonomy?
Absolutely. I was going to say demonstrate might be next,
Yeah, we
right?
might say demonstrate, or we might say synthesize,
Hmm.
right? So synthesize this information so it can be, and that's what I'll probably use. I'll say, okay, so something like that, right? I'm moving up the Bloom's taxonomy level. And it's really important when we start talking about competencies and so on nowadays. Is that important? I think it's extremely important. I think that we have to have our content focus on what we're trying to achieve and how we're going to measure student success, right? And now I'm going to do my last workforce multiplier, and I'm going to now have it create a web page. So now I'm going to say act as a expert web developer. And let's say create a highly interactive and visually appealing web page for this lesson. And now I'm going to go a little further and I'm going to tell it specifically how to construct this page because I don't want to have to go in and look at the code later. I don't want to have to play with the code at all. So I'm basically going to say I know that all web pages are created with HTML. So I'm going to say use HTML5. That's all I have to say. I don't have to know what HTML5 is. Just use it. It's a web page, right? And then I'm going to say with embedded because I don't want to have to go in and build all the different parts. Cascade style sheets, everyone knows what that is. That's a technology that's going to make it look really pretty, right? It's going to customize the fonts, the color schemes, all that kind of stuff to make it look really nice, right? And then I want to give it activities, so it's going to need to use JavaScript as well. So I'm going to say and JavaScript. Now, you could use other things like React and others, but I don't want to make it that complicated for this because we don't want to spend a lot of time with this, right? And then I can even say what colors. So I'm going to say use white background. And I'm high on using my college's colors, so I'm going to say green and black. So it's all my content, I try to make it look the same. So when the students go in, it has the colors of the college and so on. That's it. That's it. That's all I'm going to do at this point. And I'm going to use this to see what I get for a basic lesson in the basics of Python. So let's see what we get. Watch how fast this does this. So right now it's taking on the role of a researcher and it's going out and getting the information on the fundamentals of Python, right? Now it's looking at the knowledge, skills, and abilities. Okay, what does someone need to know? And so it's starting to identify those things, right? And now look what it's doing. Now it's producing the code. Look at how fast it's writing this code. That's almost unbelievable, isn't it? Now this one's not going to be quite as good as I want. And by the way, the first time you may not get exactly what you want. You're going to have to go back and have it, and give it more detail on the things that you want. But let's see what we got just from that. Let's see what we got. So this only took us 2 minutes, right? So I'm going to go in and I'm going to use a practice website just to look at what the code looks like, right? So this is just a website that you can use. It's called W3 School. I can paste in the code and let's see what we get here. All right, so in this case, it's going through the knowledge variables and data types. A logical sandbox. Now, I could have made this way better by doing what? By taking my lesson and uploading my lesson. Now it would use my lesson to build this, right? Or by giving it the specific things I want to have it use. So let's go back and do that just real quick, just to show you this. So what would you teach in the first lesson?
Definitely the data types and variables and the just the basics.
Okay, so let's go in and say create five navigation tabs, and now we'll give it those things. So we're going to say overview of Python, type of programming language. Okay, then we might say data types. What was the other thing you said?
I think I said variables. Yeah, data
Okay,
types,
so we'll say
variables, programming.
variables.
Hmm.
And again, you probably want to use your specific lesson to start to
Right,
build this.
right.
And by the way, you just upload it as a URL, or you upload it as a Word doc or a PDF or a picture or whatever, right? But let's see, do I have five here? So one, two, three, four. We have to have one last one.
Loop. You could say loops or something like that.
Okay, yeah. So let's say, what do we call those things? Okay, so we'll say loops, decision loops.
Or statements. Yeah, the different statements. Yeah.
All right, let's say statements. Okay. And now we'll basically go back and now say redesign the page with this information. And I might also say um, um, analyze each of these topics, and now I'll have it do it. Okay. All right. So let's see how it changes it.
Now you think it will follow through since redesign wasn't spelled correctly?
No, no, it will understand it.
Okay, good. Thank you
Yeah.
for
Yeah,
clarifying.
it'll understand it. I'm still not seeing a level of content that I want here though. So let's see what we got. I can tell just by how much it's built that way. I'm not going to get a great result yet, but let's see what we get. All right, we do have navigational tabs at least now, right? And now I can start to build more into this, right? So like with the overview, I could add specific things that I want for the overview. For the language type, I could say compare and contrast it to other types of languages, right? Compiled and then data types. Um, I could like let's just take that one alone. Let's just say um, we'll go back real quick and say um, make the data type tab interactive with activities students can use to become familiar with the different data types. So let's see what it does. Just with that, I'm not having to go, in deep, but and if I could spell right here. Okay, here we go. All right, I can tell it's working a little harder on this one. Still not done. Oh, okay. It created a section for me. I don't want that. So I'm going to say um, embed this information. And that's it. All right, and here we go with adding all those things to it now. And isn't this unbelievable how fast it is?
Yes, it
This
is.
just blows me away. I don't understand how they can do it this fast, but it is just crazy. So now I'm going to get a better page. I can already tell just by what it's doing, I'm going to get a much better page. So now if I get rid of this and put in the new page, all right, and I go to data types. All right, this is getting much better now. All right, strings and floats, I can go through it. And again, if the more data you give it as an instructor, the better you're going to get. So here's what you can ultimately build with it, especially if you have really great frameworks and stuff. I built our entire CMMC course on this, right? So I went into like the different things that we needed. Where did I get that information? Well, now I actually took the documents from CMMC, right, from NIST and so on, and uploaded those and said, okay, now build these things. So build me an interactive one that talks about the ecosystem. Well, look at it, builds all the parts of the ecosystem now, right? And each one of these I go into will give me way more detail. Now it's going to take a little more work, but this is what you can actually produce as you start to build on more and more into what you're building. Then I might want to go in and say, okay, what are the data roles that are defined in the CMMC requirements? Well, here we go. Here are the 6 data roles. Where do these come from? Right from this, right from the CMC requirements. What's a data owner? What goes into great detail now what a data owner is. What's a custodian? So not only what are the responsibilities, typical organizational roles, and key characteristics that that person should have. Same thing for data processor, a data steward, data controller, data subject, right? And I could go back, and this is where the real magic occurs. Because if I have a student that leaves that can do this, well, I'm going to have companies out there waiting in line to hire them, right? Now I can say, what are the 9 deliverables that are required for level 3 CMMC certifications? Give me a detailed description of what each one of those are and what level they're required at. Look at this, it'll break it down to the levels, right? And it built this entire page. Now I can go down and say, well, what is a system security plan? And it will go in and talk about what one looks like, right? Or, and by the way, it's editable, so we can change these things to show an actual plan. What's the asset inventory categorization report? So we'll go in, this is what it is, its purpose, its key requirements. All this came right from this. I didn't have to put any of this in. And now I was like, okay, let's go ahead and build me one. Build me an interactive asset inventory categorization report. Look what it builds. So I get a little dashboard here, which I asked for, by the way, when I created this. And now it comes down and breaks this into the actual asset categories that are required for CMMC. So you have CUI assets, right? Then you have your security protection assets. Then you have your CRMA assets, and then add specialized assets if you have specialized assets, right? And look at each one of these, I can go in and add a new one, or I can go in and edit any of these. Well, where did I get this from? Check this out. This is one of the coolest parts of this. One of the things that AI is absolutely great at is creating case studies. So whether it's a real case like this one, so everyone knows about the WannaCry ransomware case. I can look at this case study built for me. I went and said, go in and research ransomware, the WannaCry ransomware attack from 2017. Look at it, gave me a timeline, all the description, what the targets were, right? Who the attackers were, the methods of attacks used, the vulnerabilities they took advantage of, how it was detected, what the responses were, overall impact, lessons learned, and then the references it used to find all this information. And then I could give a little quiz to my students on this particular case study. Or I can make up a case study. So I could go back. Come on. What's going on here? All right, gonna have to go back to it. Let's see. I don't know how I lost that. Okay. I could actually make up a company. And how would I do that? Make up a case study. Well, we've done that quite a bit. I do that a lot in my classes. I create threaded case studies because a lot of these companies don't want to share their information, right? So I might go in and say, okay, I want to create a fictitious company that I want to use for this case study. So let's say I'm going to call it Stratic Defense. I could call it whatever I want, right? And I could go in and ask for all of these things, right? I could say, give me an overview of the company. I could give it some of the details, like let's make them have two offices on the West Coast or whatever, right? What business are they? Create all of these things. Or I could take five other companies out there and say, use the information from these five companies to generate a fictitious company my class could use in a case study practicing for CMMC, right? Give me their network topology, give me their infrastructure and cloud tech, and it basically produces all these from whatever I give it, right? Or I can just say make it up, right? Their security controls, their CUI data flows. I mean, and by the way, I created this specifically for the CMMC class so we could use this in the class. Look at this, an employee directory. All of these are made up people, right? It created all of these for me, right? And then there are policies and governance. And again, it can base it based on what you give it, or you can have it go in and find five companies in your area and look at information from those and then create something fictitious that would be something similar, right? And each one of these are different, by the way. I use different tools to create each one of these different. So here's another one for Aegis Tactical. Here's their inventory management. And I could use another one based on what you're going to use it for, you know? Oh, that's not what I wanted. That one. So here's another one I created. I used Claude to create this one. Okay. And you can see the amount of information. This would be great for a threaded case study where your students can actually go in now and take these vulnerabilities that they have, the equipment that they have, and so on, and start to complete the task for CMMC with this case study. But AI is absolutely incredible for using case studies. So I want to finish with one last thing. We only have to the top of the hour, right?
Right, yeah.
Okay.
So I did put a link for survey for everyone that's on. Also, John, you may want to tell them about the workshops that you providing.
Yeah, so you may want to keep an eye on NCyTE's schedule for classes because a new schedule will be coming out for all the summer classes as well as these AI workshops that we're doing. And the AI workshops that we're doing, we have a variety of different funding sources, but we're trying to actually bring them out to different parts of the country. So if you'd want to host one of these and you can provide 25 to 30 faculty members, we can talk about actually hosting one in your geographical area. So um, but here's an example of what you can do with graphics now, because we didn't even get into the graphics. Are graphics important in teaching? Well, you better believe it, right? What type of graphics do we use in teaching? Well, we just gave you some examples. These are all in my book, and we sort of go through how you build each of these. But we can use everything from mind maps to illustrations, timelines, maps, diagrams, and we just list out like 20 of them. And then we have people in the class actually produce these. Here's examples of what they produced in class. So here's a nursing teacher that created graphics to teach how to actually take blood pressure readings, right? And here's a picture of the heart. She can explain how it works. And here's a graphic actually showing the animation of the heart, right? Here's a timeline for the discovery of different elements. Here's the one when I teach in one of our classes, we go into ransomware. Here's four major case studies that we look at, right? And then we can do an analysis of those case studies. So here is a worksheet that we can use to actually go through an analysis of it, right? And then we can finish off by what are the top 10 ransomwares and best practices to prevent ransomware, right? Here's replacing brakes in a car. Here is the exhaust system in a car. So again, AI generated all of this. The battlefields in the Civil War, the top five good emperors of Rome, if you're teaching history. Here's a comparison of business type ownerships. So sole proprietor, partnerships, corporations, so on. And here's the reasons why you might select different ones, right? All the way down to like writing. Look at this one, interactive periodic table. You click on any one of these and it's interactive. It will give you all this information on each one of these. Um, and people in the class develop these things. So that's the kind of stuff that you can actually use AI to build. Um, again, you can see it's across multiple disciplines. Here's the chronological story in Shakespeare Hamlet. Look at this. This would be such a better way to study this. And then they have an interactive tool. Here are things on Hamlet and how modern movies basically were based on the same um, themes and storylines.
You have a
So
question in the chat about how would they get this access to Canvas?
I can give you I can give you access to our master plan right now. Um, or let me see. Let me give you the one from yet. We just did a workshop yesterday. Let me give you that one instead. Let me go to this real quick. It'll be easy. I don't have to create everything. You can just take a picture of this. And this has all the content in it. We do a new one for every class. Um, so here's the one we did yesterday. And there's your QR code. You just basically scan that QR code. You can self-enroll in the class, and then you have access to all the materials. And again, my book will come out probably beginning of May. So if any of you are interested, it's free. It'll be in the form of like a PDF, and you can use it, both for your use or if you want to use it for like, because I also provide exercises on how to teach students critical use factors for AI in let's say cybersecurity, right? So we give some examples of what kind of things you can teach them to do with AI in the field of cybersecurity. All right. Any questions? Sorry, I know we're going a million miles an hour, but I wanted to show you as much as I could.
This is great, John. I'm a believer. I think you really have got some great stuff there. And
Hello,
maybe,
John.
and so if you go to the class, you'll get the GitHub information, all that. Go
Yes.
ahead with the
Hello.
question.
Hi, good morning. So thank you so much for sharing this information. And I know you're using Canvas, but how about other learning platform like
You can use
Blackboard and
Blackboard.
such?
If your group uses Blackboard, we'll show them how to do it with Blackboard. If
I
they're
see.
using Desire to Learn, we'll use this, whatever it happens to be. It works the same. So we
Okay.
basically show them how to create iframes and then how to embed it in the course.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions? We're a little bit over, but
Sorry
that's
about
fine.
that.
No, that's fine. This is great information. Okay. Well, if there's no other questions, we thank you, John, and thank everyone for attending. Again, the survey, let me bring that up real quick. Let's see if I can share it. There's a QR code you can use or the link that I put in chat. So thank you, everyone. And this was really great information. This is really the way to go, I think.
Yeah, 10 to
And
2 day class, and you'll be able to create all of these things. So we'll show you how to actually create the things.
will you be doing something like that at NCyTE?